The black sedan sat motionless in the rain, parked across from a crumbling apartment building in Queens where the streetlights had burned out 3 weeks ago. Inside, Nicholas Corsetti gripped the leather seat so hard his knuckles turned white. His tailored charcoal suit, worth more than a year's rent in that building, was wrinkled now. His dark eyes, the color of storm clouds before thunder, fixed on a third-floor fire escape where rust dripped like blood down the metal railings. Rocco and Nino sat in the front seat, shoulders tense, saying nothing. In 15 years of serving Nicholas Corsetti, neither man had ever seen him follow anyone. Neither man had ever seen him cry. Lightning split the sky open. On the fire escape, a woman and a small boy sat cross-legged on a threadbare blanket. The woman was Vivien Bennett. She wore a waitress uniform still stained with tonight's spilled coffee, her orthopedic shoes kicked off beside her, holes worn through at the heels. Her dark hair fell across her shoulders in tangled waves. Her face was thin, weathered beyond her 32 years, marked by the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleeping on borrowed floors and counting change for groceries. But when she smiled at the boy, her entire body transformed. "One Mississippi," she whispered, holding the child's small hand up toward the breaking sky. "2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi." The boy was 8 years old. He had dark hair that fell across his forehead in the exact same way. His jawline, the shape of his mouth, the angle of his chin, every feature was stamped with Nicholas Corsetti's blood, a mirror of the man watching from the shadows below. "For Mississippi," the boy counted, his voice thin and pure. 5 Mississippi. Thunder rolled across the city like a drum struck in the belly of God. The boy laughed. The sound was small, innocent, a thing that had never existed in Nicholas Corsetti's world of blood debts and bodies that disappeared in the East River. He pressed his face against Vivien's shoulder, and she wrapped her arms around him, holding him as the rain fell harder, as the lightning came again, closer this time, close enough to make the windows in the building rattle. Nicholas's hands trembled. His breath fogged the rain-streaked glass. A tear cut down his scarred cheek, the scar that ran from his left eye to his jawbone, a permanent reminder of the night his father died. He was 16 years old that night. He watched the bullets enter his father's chest. He watched the blood spread across the white tablecloth like spilled wine. He swore on that blood that he would build an empire so powerful, so untouchable, that no one could ever take anything from him again. But someone had. 3 years ago, his ex-lover disappeared with his son. Taken. Gone. He had searched every city on the East Coast. He had paid investigators $5 million. He had threatened judges and broken men until they confessed things they didn't know. And here was his son, sitting on a fire escape in Queens, teaching him to count the seconds between lightning and thunder like it was a prayer. "Come on, Micah," Vivien whispered into the rain. "We need to go inside. It is getting cold." Micah. His son's name was Micah. Nicholas had never known his son's name until tonight. The boy reached up and touched Vivien's face with his small hand, his fingers brushing away tears that had come without her noticing. "Do not cry, Vivi," he said. "The storms always stop. The sun always comes back." She pulled him close and carried him inside, her thin frame bending under his weight like a reed in the wind. The fire escape went dark. The window went dark. The building stood silent except for the rain hammering against the metal and concrete. Rocco turned around slowly. "Boss, I have never seen." "Do not speak," Nicholas said quietly. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, but it trembled now, fractured like ice breaking under pressure. "Not yet." He sat there for 3 more hours. The rain stopped. The city went silent. And in that silence, Nicholas Corsetti understood that the woman who had just disappeared into the building was the one person on earth who could destroy him. Not with weapons. Not with money. Not with anything he could control or threaten or command back into submission. She had destroyed him simply by existing, by loving his son in a way that made the boy laugh. By teaching him to count the seconds between lightning and thunder. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. The truth of what happens next will change everything. Now let us go back to the beginning. 3 weeks earlier. The night that burned everything. Vivien Bennett stood in the ashes of her apartment, barefoot on concrete still hot enough to burn. The fire had started in the kitchen, a faulty wire in the aging stove, the fire marshal said. It had taken 37 minutes for the apartment to become unlivable. It took her that long to realize she had lost everything. The photograph was gone. The one picture she had of her mother, taken in 1987, before the cancer came, before the world learned how to break beautiful things. The clothes were gone. The bedsheets, the dishes, the small box where she kept her daughter's hospital bracelet, the name tag from her first job, the letters she never sent. Gone. All of it. Burned to nothing. She had $230 to her name. The landlord had kept her security deposit. He said the fire was her fault for not maintaining the appliances properly. She had 3 days to vacate before he sent someone to clean out whatever remained. The shelter took her in. The Harbor House, a 5-story building in the South Bronx that smelled like industrial disinfectant and desperation, where women and children slept on cots separated by thin fabric partitions that did not hide their crying or their prayers or the sound of their breathing in the dark. On the first night, Vivien slept next to a boy named Marcus who was 5 years old. His mother had left him there 2 months ago and never returned. Marcus did not speak. He just lay on his cot and stared at the ceiling, and Vivien held his hand until he fell asleep. On the second night, she found the manager, an exhausted woman named Patricia with grey threading through her dark hair, crying in the kitchen over a ledger. The shelter was $3,000 short for the month. 3 of their children would have to leave by Friday if she could not find the money. "I can help," Vivien said. "You just arrived. You have nothing. I can work." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Then she handed her a card. The Corsetti, it said, in gold letters on black paper. A restaurant in Manhattan. Reservations required. Closed Mondays. Nicholas Corsetti runs it, Patricia said quietly. He runs a lot of things. But he also funds 3 non-profits, discreetly. He helps when no one else will. The pay is better than anyplace else in the city, but the work is hard, and the man is difficult. He chooses his staff carefully. Vivien took the card. It felt heavy in her hand, like it might burn through her palm. The next morning, she rode the subway to Manhattan. The Corsetti was on the top floor of a building in the financial district, all black marble and white orchids and tables that cost more than a car. The maître d' looked at her worn dress, her orthopedic shoes, her hair still smelling faintly of smoke from the fire, and began to turn away. "Patricia sent me," Vivien said quietly. "From Harbor House." Something shifted in his face. He led her to the kitchen. The head chef was a man named Giovanni who had a scar across his left hand and eyes that missed nothing. He watched her move. He handed her a knife and asked her to cut an onion. He watched the way her fingers gripped the blade, the precision of her movements, the steadiness of her breathing. "You have done this before," he said. "I worked in restaurants for 8 years. Before the fire. You will start tomorrow. 4 p.m. to midnight. Tuesday through Saturday. $12 an hour plus meals. The tips are good if you do not complain and you do your work and you remember that the people here do not want to hear about your problems. $12 an hour. She would make $600 a month. The shelter could keep Marcus. The shelter could keep all of them. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me. Thank Patricia. Thank yourself for having the courage to walk into a place where you do not belong and ask for help anyway." The first night, she served a table of 6 men in suits that cost more than everything she owned. Their conversation was quiet and serious, conducted in Italian mixed with English, words like shipment and territory and problem solved falling casually among the wine glasses and the bread plates. One of the men had a scar running from his eye to his jaw. He was taller than the others, broader through the shoulders, with dark hair silvered at the temples and the kind of presence that made people stop breathing when he entered a room. His eyes were storm gray, penetrating, seeing things no one else could see. He was Nicholas Corsetti. He did not look at her while she served the table. He did not acknowledge her existence. He was focused entirely on a document one of the other men had placed in front of him, a stack of papers that seemed to trouble him deeply. But as she turned to leave, his hand shot out and caught her wrist gently. "What is your name?" His voice was like thunder, low and distant and impossible to ignore. "Vivien Bennett, sir." "Why are you working here, Vivien Bennett?" She hesitated. The rule was to not talk about personal problems, to remain invisible, to blend into the walls and the shadows. But something in his storm-gray eyes demanded truth. "Because I lost my home 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. "And there is a 5-year-old boy at the shelter where I am staying who stops crying when I hold his hand. And if I make $600 a month, the shelter can keep him instead of sending him to the streets. That is why I am working here, sir." He studied her face for a long moment. His hand released her wrist, but his eyes did not look away. "Your station is impeccable. Your timing is perfect. You move through this room like you belong here. Do not let anyone make you feel small, Vivien Bennett. Small people make small choices. You have already made the larger one by being here at all." He released her then, and she walked away with her heart hammering against her ribs. She did not know that Nicholas Corsetti never spoke to waitstaff. She did not know that in 15 years, no one had ever heard him speak about anything that was not business. She did not know that his lieutenant Micah was watching him watch her, and that Rocco and Nina were exchanging looks across the table that meant something had changed, though none of them could say what. She only knew that for the first time since the fire, she felt seen. That night, she slept beside Marcus in the shelter, and he did not wake up crying. He slept through until morning, his small hand still gripping hers in the darkness. Days passed. Weeks. Vivien worked for nights a week and volunteered at the shelter the other 3, teaching children to read, bandaging scraped knees, sitting with the women as they cried through their phone calls to judges and social workers and the men who had left them. She counted her money carefully. $72 in tips on Tuesday. $81 on Wednesday. She was careful with every dollar. She ate only what was left over from the restaurant, food that Giovanni set aside for the staff. She bought Marcus new shoes, size 5, because his old ones had holes in the toes and his little feet were turning blue in the cold. For weeks after she started at the Corsetti, she was serving a private table when she noticed Nicholas Corsetti had instructed Giovanni to seat her in the private room. She was alone with him. The sound of the rain outside was very loud. She could hear her own breathing, thin and careful, like she was trying not to take up any air that belonged to someone else. "Sit," he said. "Sir, I cannot." "Sit." She sat in the chair across from him. Up close, his scar was more pronounced, a white line that cut through his tanned skin, a permanent reminder of violence. But his eyes were gentler than she had expected. Tired. Like he was carrying something too heavy and had been carrying it too long. "You have not missed a single shift," he said. "You have a perfect record. The other staff say you have taught 3 of the shelter children to read. Marcus is sleeping through the night now. He speaks occasionally. His counselor says it is because of you. I do not know how you know that, sir. I know many things, Vivien Bennett. The question is, what do you want? What is the thing you are working toward?" She thought of the drawing Micah had made yesterday, a picture of a house with smoke coming from the windows and 4 people standing in front of it, holding hands. She thought of the fact that she had only $17 in her pocket right now, and that she needed $200 more by next week to cover her share of the rent on a small room. She thought of the weight of all the broken things she carried. "I want to never be invisible again," she said quietly. "I want to own something that cannot burn. I want the children to have a home. I want to stop being afraid every single day." Nicholas Corsetti nodded slowly. And then he said something that would change everything. Then you will not be working for me much longer. You will be working with me. I will give you 1 year, Vivien Bennett. 1 year to build something of your own, with my help. And in exchange, you will do something for me. What? She whispered. You will let me help you. That is all. You will let someone try to fix what was broken. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windows like it was trying to get in. But inside the restaurant, in the small circle of light where they sat, Vivien Bennett felt something shift inside her chest. The feeling of being chosen. The feeling of being seen. The feeling that perhaps, after all the burning, something might finally grow again. 3 weeks before Nicholas Corsetti followed Vivien Bennett home, before Derek Collins learned her name, before Sophie Langford decided to destroy her, Vivien stood in the smoking ruins of her life at 4:47 in the morning. The apartment building was still burning when she arrived, though the flames had already begun to die. Firefighters moved through the wreckage like tired ghosts, their equipment casting long shadows across the wet ash. The smell was something she would never forget, charred wood and melted plastic and something else, something that smelled like endings. Like everything she owned had become smoke. She wore only the clothes she slept in. A borrowed cardigan over a thin nightgown. Bare feet in shoes she had grabbed in the dark. Around her, other residents stood wrapped in emergency blankets, holding plastic bags with the few things they had managed to pull from the fire. A woman clutched a jewelry box. A man held his daughter while she cried. Everyone had salvaged something. Everyone except Vivien. When the fire chief approached her, his expression was already prepared for the worst. "Did you lose someone?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just things," she said. But that was a lie. She had lost everything. In her apartment on the 3rd floor, she had kept a single photograph inside a plastic frame. Not of herself. Of a house that had burned 70 years ago, when she was 12 years old. Her grandmother's house. The only image that existed of it before the fire took it, before fire took that too. She had saved that photograph through every eviction, every bankruptcy, every time she thought she might not survive the next week. That photograph was the only proof that she had ever belonged to anything larger than herself. That her family had roots. That she was not always this, standing in ash at dawn with nothing. But the photograph was gone now. Burned. Everything was burned. There was the envelope containing her nursing school transcripts, the acceptance letter to the night program that was supposed to start in 4 months. Burned. There were the textbooks she had bought secondhand, margin notes in her careful handwriting. Burned. There was the coffee tin hidden in the back of the kitchen cabinet, $1,743 saved over 8 years, every penny carefully chosen, every dollar a small promise to herself that she might someday own something. Burned. There were her daughter's baby clothes, a small yellow dress, a blanket embroidered with tiny rabbits. Her daughter had been born and taken from her at 18 years old, when Vivien was in foster care and had no legal right to keep her. The clothes were all that she had left of that girl. Burned. All of it. Everything. Vivien stood there until the sun began to rise, until the firefighters began to pack up their equipment, until other people's lives moved forward and she was left alone in the ruins. A man from the Red Cross offered her a shelter, a meal, a place to sleep for 1 night. She took the address. She did not believe it would help. Nothing had ever helped. Fire found you no matter where you went. 1 week later, Vivien was standing behind the counter at Sal's Diner on Queens Boulevard, pouring coffee into chipped mugs at 2:47 in the morning. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound like insects trapped in plastic. Rain hammered the windows. The diner was nearly empty, a truck driver in booth 3 reading a newspaper he did not appear to understand, a couple in the back corner not speaking to each other, and Sal himself behind the kitchen door, smoking a cigarette he was not supposed to smoke during work hours. Vivien's orthopedic shoes were worn through at the heel. She had bought them at a thrift store 3 years ago for $5. The left one no longer had a sole, so every time she walked, she felt the cold floor directly against her foot. Her apron was stained with coffee and grease and something that might have been blood from when she cut her hand 3 days ago and kept working. She had not applied for workers' compensation. People like her did not apply for things like that. People like her just kept moving. She counted her tips at the counter. Wilted singles. Sticky quarters. A dime. $17. That was the sum total of her worth on this particular night. $17 would buy her 4 days of food if she was careful. It would not pay her portion of the rent on the borrowed room she shared with 2 children from the shelter. It would not buy new shoes. It would not fix the throbbing in her lower back that had started 3 days ago and had not stopped since. The truck driver in booth 3 stood up and walked toward the door without leaving a tip. Vivien had refilled his coffee 4 times. She had brought him pie without asking, sensing that he needed something sweet. She had smiled at him when her face ached from not having slept. He left without acknowledging any of it. This was normal. This was the invisible mathematics of her life: give everything and receive nothing, keep moving, do not complain, do not expect, do not hope. At 6 in the morning, when her shift ended, Vivien walked 7 blocks through rain to the children's shelter on Amsterdam Avenue. The building was painted a color that might have been yellow once, decades ago. Now it was the shade of old teeth. The windows had bars on them. The door was locked from the inside. She rang the bell and waited. A woman she did not recognize opened it, looked at her briefly, and gestured her through without speaking. Vivien had been volunteering at the shelter for 4 months, 3 afternoons per week. No one had ever asked for her name. No one had ever asked why she came. She suspected they did not care, that she was just another warm body to help supervise the children while the overworked staff tried to process paperwork and make calls to absent parents and distant relatives. The common room smelled like bleach and old carpet. Donated toys with missing pieces were scattered across the floor. A child was stacking plastic blocks in the corner. Another was drawing at a table covered in scratched and faded markers. Vivien moved through the space quietly, the way she moved through every space now, as if she might vanish if she was not careful enough. Micah was sitting by the window, the one that overlooked the fire escape. He was 8 years old and Korean, with dark eyes that were older than his face. He had arrived at the shelter 2 months ago with no records and no name in any system. The staff called him Micah because that was the name written on the only piece of paper found with him, a drawing he had made himself. He did not speak often. The counselor said this was normal for children who had experienced trauma. Micah had experienced something. The staff did not know what. He was drawing again today. His drawing showed a house with windows and a door. Smoke was coming from the windows. 4 people stood in front of the house, holding hands. 1 was tall and wore a suit. 1 was shorter. 2 were small. Vivien sat down beside him and looked at the picture without speaking. "That is a nice house," she said after a moment. Micah did not look at her. He continued drawing, adding more details to the smoke. "It was somewhere safe," he said quietly. His voice was small, the way children's voices are small when they are remembering things they do not want to remember. "Can you tell me about it?" Vivien asked. Micah put down the marker. He looked out the window at the fire escape, at the rain falling against the metal grating. "Somewhere with candles," he said. He lit candles every night. At dinner. When the sun went down. He said that light was important. That we needed to remember what light felt like. Vivien felt something shift inside her chest. She recognized the way he spoke about this place, the way he spoke about something that was gone. The way she spoke about her grandmother's house, about the photograph in the fire, about the daughter she had held for exactly 3 days before they took her away. "What was his name?" she asked. "The man in the suit." Micah turned to look at her then. His dark eyes were serious. "I am not supposed to talk about that," he said. "The lady who took me said if I told anyone my real name, he would not find me. She said he had bad friends. That he would hurt me. Vivien felt the temperature of the room shift around her. She did not understand why this child's quiet words had changed the air, had made her breath catch in her throat. But she knew, with a certainty that felt like prophecy, that this boy was carrying a secret that was not his to carry. That somewhere in this city, someone was searching for him. That his drawing was not a drawing of imagination. It was a drawing of memory. A drawing of a house with candles and a man in a suit and a family that was supposed to be protected. Outside, the rain fell harder against the windows of the shelter, drumming like something trying to get in. But in the corner where she sat with a boy she did not know, Vivien Bennett felt the first small stirring of something she had believed was dead inside her. Not hope. Not quite. But something like recognition. Something like the sense that invisible things were about to become visible. That the fire that had taken everything from her was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of someone else's. The rain fell in sheets against the windows of Corsetti's, drumming like something alive, like something trying to break through glass and reach the warmth inside. It was 11:30 on a Thursday night in July, and the private booth in the back corner of the restaurant held only one man and one question that had consumed him for 6 weeks. Nicholas Corsetti sat motionless in the candlelight, his black suit tailored so perfectly it seemed almost cruel that something so beautiful could contain someone so dangerous. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, with hair like midnight and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw like a blade someone had drawn across his face years ago and never apologized for. His silver watch cost more than a year of someone's rent, and his hands, large, scarred, capable of crushing bone, lay flat on the white tablecloth as he stared at nothing. Rocco and Nino stood near the kitchen entrance, trying not to stare at their boss. In 15 years, they had never seen him like this. Never seen him still. Never seen him waiting for anyone. The kitchen door swung open and Vivien Bennett emerged carrying a tray of wine glasses, her movements careful and precise. She was 31 years old but looked decades older, her face carved by exhaustion and loss, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to hurt. She wore the uniform Corsetti's required, black dress, white apron, but the hem of the apron was coming undone at the corner, and her left shoe had a hole in the sole that she'd patched with electrical tape. Her hands were raw and red from the double shifts, 4 nights here, 5 nights at the diner in Queens, and there was a tremor in them that came from hunger she thought nobody noticed. She was collecting the empty glasses from table 7 when Nicholas's voice reached across the dining room like a rope someone had thrown toward her. "Miss Bennett." She turned. Her heart rate changed. She had learned to hide these things, but her breathing quickened just slightly. She walked over to his booth, and the closer she got, the more her mind scrambled for explanations. Had she made a mistake with someone's order? Had she spilled something without noticing? She had been so careful. She had to be. The tips from Corsetti's were the difference between keeping Micah and Rosa in that borrowed room or watching them go back to the shelter with nothing. "Yes, Mr. Corsetti." Her voice was small. Practiced at being invisible. "Sit," he said. "I'm not finished with my shift, Mr. Corsetti. I still have." "Sit down." She sat. The chair was leather, expensive, the kind of chair she had never sat in before. Up close, his eyes were blacker than she had thought, and colder, and there was something in them that made her want to lie about everything she had ever done or failed to do. The rain hammered against the windows. In the kitchen, someone dropped a pan. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 6 weeks, Mr. Corsetti. Since the first week of June. Before that. The diner on Queens Boulevard. The overnight shift. I've been there for 8 months. Before the diner. She didn't answer immediately. She was trying to calculate how much he knew, trying to understand why knowing mattered. "I lost my job at the medical office where I worked as a receptionist," she said quietly. "The fire happened. I didn't have the security deposit for a new apartment. I needed income immediately. The diner hired me the day I applied." Nicholas studied her face as if he was reading something written there in a language only he understood. "The fire was 3 weeks before you started at the diner." She said nothing. The math was correct. She had slept in her car for 10 days after the shelter turned her away, and then the church basement for another week, before the city shelter accepted her as a volunteer in exchange for a bed in the office. "I have 2 children living with me," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "They're not mine biologically. I volunteer at the city shelter, and they had nowhere else to go. The room I rent costs $450 a month. The diner pays $800 including tips, which is never enough. When you offered me this position, I accepted because I need $300 a week in tips to keep us housed. I'm not stealing. I'm not using the restaurant supplies. I come in early and I stay late and Why did you tell me the truth on your interview?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath. She had forgotten that day, or rather, she had tried to forget it. Walking into Corsetti's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon wearing her only clean shirt, the hem coming undone at the seam, her application listing the graveyard diner and medical receptionist positions. The hostess, a woman with a smile like a knife, looking her up and down with obvious disgust. Then Nicholas Corsetti emerging from this very booth, looking at her shoes, her hands, her desperate eyes, and asking in that same quiet voice, "Why do you want to work here?" She had said, "Because most places won't hire someone who smells like fryer grease and looks like she's running from something. But I'm telling you the truth, which means I'm trustworthy even if I don't look it. I need this job more than I've needed anything, so I won't disappoint you." He had stared at her for 10 seconds of silence, and then nodded once. She had started the next evening. "Because you asked me directly," she said now. "And I thought you deserved an honest answer." The candlelight flickered. His scar caught the light and disappeared, caught the light again. "My father died when I was 16 years old," Nicholas said, and his voice had changed into something else entirely. Something softer. Something that hurt. "I was hiding in a closet when it happened. He put me there. He said stay quiet, don't move, don't come out. And I didn't. I stayed in that closet while men executed him in his own office. I built everything that I have on the grave of that moment, on the promise that I would never be helpless again, that I would never need anyone, that I would take what I wanted and destroy what threatened it." Vivien was barely breathing. "You lost everything in that fire," he continued. "You had nothing. And instead of taking the things that were offered to you, or there were offers, weren't there? Men who wanted to help you in exchange for something you don't want to give." She didn't answer, but her jaw tightened. "Instead," Nicholas said, "you slept in your car. You worked 2 jobs. You took care of children who aren't your responsibility. You told me the truth when lying would have been easier. That has value, Vivien Bennett. That matters. The people who did this to you, or who took your home, your job, your security, they did it because they believed you were nobody. They believed a woman like you could be disappeared and nobody would notice. I'm tired of only taking things. Maybe it's time I protected something instead." She wanted to tell him that men like him don't protect women like her without wanting something. Men like him don't sit in candlelit booths and speak about their dead fathers to waitresses in torn aprons. Men like him don't notice invisible things. But his eyes held hers, and something in her, some part of her that had learned to distrust safety, to expect the knife beneath the kind words, hesitated. "Thank you, Mr. Corsetti," she said finally. "I should finish my shift." He nodded once and turned back to his espresso. She stood and walked away, her legs moving on instinct, her mind still in that booth, still caught in whatever had just happened. What she did not see was Derek Collins emerging from the shadows near the bar, his face flushed with alcohol and anger, his hands clenched into fists. He had watched the entire exchange. He had seen his uncle, the man he feared and resented in equal measure, lower his guard for a woman who worked for tips. He had seen an opportunity. 3 blocks away, in a luxury apartment overlooking Central Park, Sophie Langford was preparing for bed when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Derek, "We can access the accounts through her. The boy is the key. He's vulnerable. She's vulnerable. We move Monday." Sophie smiled to herself, the kind of smile that happens in private, the kind that shows teeth like weapons. She had been waiting for an opportunity to hurt Nicholas Corsetti, to prove that blood, money and power could be dismantled by someone patient enough to understand that empathy was the deadliest weapon of all. Outside, the rain continued to fall. And inside Corsetti's, Nicholas Corsetti sat alone in candlelight, thinking about a boy named Micah who had his eyes, who had his blood, who had been stolen from him and was now living in poverty with a woman who had finally taught him what trust meant. The broken streetlight cast a sickly yellow glow across the empty intersection, and Vivien Bennett walked faster, her orthopedic shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the gathering storm. It was 3:44 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the streets of Queens belonged only to ghosts and the desperate. The rain had just started, fat, cold drops that soaked through her diner uniform, when she heard the footsteps behind her. Measured. Deliberate. Not casual. She did not turn around. She knew better than to turn around. The footsteps came closer, and her breathing changed, became something shallow and controlled, the way an animal breathes when it knows the predator has picked up the scent. 3 blocks from her apartment. 3 blocks of empty storefronts and graffitied walls and the sound of her own pulse in her ears like a trapped bird. She walked faster. The footsteps matched her pace. Lightning split the sky in two, and in that split second of white-hot brightness, she saw a shadow stretched across the wet pavement beside hers. Derek Collins stepped into her path under the broken streetlight, his face flushed red with alcohol and something darker, the particular anger of a man who had never been told no. He was 32 years old but carried himself like a teenager who had inherited money instead of earning it. His suit was Valentino, expensive enough to pay her rent for 3 months, and his hands were clenching and unclenching at his sides like he was trying to decide what they were supposed to do. "Where are you running to?" His voice came out slurred and vicious. The great Vivien Bennett, the woman my uncle suddenly gives a damn about. The woman who made him weak. She tried to step around him. He grabbed her arm, his fingers wrapping around her wrist like a vice, and pulled her back toward the light. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the pavement, against her skin, against the metal fire escapes that climbed the buildings like skeletons. "Let me go," she said. Her voice was steady. She had learned to keep her voice steady a long time ago. "I know about the boy," Derek said. His breath smelled like whiskey and cigarettes. "Micah. I know he's my uncle's son. I know you're the only bridge between Nicholas and the kid he never knew he had. And I know that makes you very, very valuable." Lightning cracked overhead. In its light, she could see the madness in his eyes, not insanity, but something worse. Entitlement. The particular cruelty of a man who had never experienced consequences. "I'm going to let go of my uncle's hand," Derek continued, "and slip into his accounts. $300,000 is sitting there, just waiting. Money that should have been mine. And you're going to help me get it." "No," Vivien said. His grip tightened. She felt the bones in her wrist shift. "You help me, or those kids at the shelter where you volunteer, little Rosa, little Marcus, all of them, they start disappearing. One by one. I have people who do that kind of work. I have money for it. And nobody cares about poor children, Vivien. Nobody even notices when they vanish." The rain poured down now in sheets, and the whole world seemed to be drowning. She looked at his face, at the scar along his jawline from a car accident she'd overheard someone mention, at the gold ring on his left hand, at the absolute certainty in his expression that she would break, that everyone broke, that it was only a matter of applying the right amount of pressure in the right way. She brought her free hand up and slapped him across the face. Hard. The sound of it cracked through the rain like a gunshot. His head snapped sideways, and for a moment, just a moment, shock registered in his eyes. Nobody hit Derek Collins. Nobody. But she was already pulling away, twisting her wrist free from his grip with an angle she'd learned from a self-defense class 3 years ago that she'd paid for with her last $30. She ran. Her legs carried her down the street, through the rain, around the corner where their apartment building stood like a tired sentinel. Behind her, she heard him shouting obscenities, but he did not follow. He was too drunk, too shocked, too accustomed to people obeying without resistance. She made it to the door of her building, climbed the stairs 3 at a time, made it to her apartment on the 3rd floor, locked the door, and stood in the darkness with her hand over her mouth, trembling like a candle in the wind. Inside, on the thin mattress in the corner, Micah and Rosa slept. The boy's face was peaceful. He had Nicholas's eyes. He had no idea. The next morning arrived too soon, bright and merciless. Vivien worked a double shift at Corsetti's, the restaurant where Nicholas kept his booth, the place where everything had started to change. She moved through the dining room with coffee and toast and forced smiles, her wrist throbbing where Derek had gripped her, her mind spinning through 100 different calculations of how to protect the children, how to protect herself, how to survive the next 10 days until she could scrape together enough money to move them somewhere safer. It was 12:48 p.m. when Sophie Langford arrived. She wore a white linen dress that cost more than Vivien's monthly rent, and her blonde hair was styled into waves that took 3 hours to create. Behind her came 2 other socialites, women whose names appeared in the gossip columns, whose husbands ran hedge funds, whose lives existed in a completely different stratosphere from the world Vivien inhabited. Sophie moved through the restaurant like she owned it, trailing a cloud of expensive perfume that made the other diners look up. She sat at a table near the window, ordered a salad she would not eat, and smiled at her friends in that particular way that meant she had decided something cruel. Vivien was clearing plates from a nearby table when Sophie called out. Her voice was loud enough to be heard across the entire restaurant. "Excuse me? Miss? I need to speak to your manager. My wallet is missing. I had it when I arrived, and now it's gone. I think one of your staff has stolen it." The restaurant went silent. Vivien felt 40 pairs of eyes turn toward her. She set down her tray slowly. "I assure you I have not taken anything from you," Vivien said. Sophie laughed. It was the kind of laugh that was designed to humiliate. "Oh, I'm sure you haven't. But these things do happen, don't they? People in certain situations, people without much money, they become tempted. They see luxury and they want it. I understand the desperation." Sophie turned to the other diners. Everyone knows how these people are. They take what they can get. The manager, a nervous man named Victor, approached. His face was flushed. "Miss Bennett, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding, but I'll need to search your uniform." "Of course," Vivien said. Her hands moved to her pockets. She turned them inside out. A crumpled dollar bill fell out. 75 cents in change. Some lint. A receipt from the grocery store. 16 more dollars, folded small, from yesterday's tips. That was all. $23 total when she needed $250 to cover this month's rent. Sophie had known this. Sophie had calculated it. "Pathetic," Sophie whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. That was when Nicholas Corsetti stood up. He rose from his booth with the deliberate slowness of a man who had learned that every movement carried weight, that speed was for people with things to prove. His lieutenants, Rocco and Nino, moved slightly forward out of instinct, but he raised one hand and they stopped. He walked across the restaurant's black and white checkered floor, past the red leather banquettes, past the crystal glasses and the white tablecloths, until he stood directly beside Sophie Langford. "Get out," he said. His voice was like venom poured into silk. Like thunder wrapped in velvet. Sophie's smile faltered. "Excuse me. You are no longer welcome in this restaurant. You will not return. If you attempt to enter this establishment again, you will be escorted out by my men. Do you understand?" "You can't ban me," Sophie said, and her voice had lost some of its certainty. "I know everyone. I have connections. My husband. I do not care about your husband or your connections." Nicholas leaned closer, and Sophie flinched back. "I care about cruelty. And cruelty is something I do not tolerate." Rocco and Nino stepped forward. They did not touch her, but their presence was answer enough. Sophie gathered her purse with trembling hands, her face gone white beneath her carefully applied makeup. As she passed Vivien, she leaned close enough to whisper. "This isn't over," she said. "You think you're safe because he's protecting you now, but he will get bored. They always do. And when he does, I will be waiting." Then she was gone, escorted out by the men in suits, the door closing behind her with a soft chime. Nicholas turned back to Vivien. His dark eyes, storm grey, penetrating, held hers for a long moment. The entire restaurant was silent. Even the kitchen sound seemed to pause. "You are not pathetic," he said quietly. "You are invisible to people like her. But invisibility is not weakness. It is camouflage. It is survival." He returned to his booth. The ambient noise of the restaurant slowly resumed, conversations restarting, forks returning to plates. Vivien stood motionless, holding her $23 in her hand, aware that Nicholas Corsetti had just declared her important enough to protect. The thought terrified her. That night, Vivien sat on the fire escape of her apartment at 2:13 a.m., and the full weight of her situation descended on her like a coffin lid being sealed. The rain from earlier had passed, leaving the summer air thick and cold, the kind of cold that cuts through fabric and finds the skin beneath. She wore her damp diner uniform because she had not changed. She could not seem to move. In her other hand, she held the photograph. The only photograph that had survived the fire 3 weeks ago, protected by chance inside a book that had fallen beneath the kitchen table. It showed her grandmother's house, the yellow Victorian with the wraparound porch where Vivien had grown up, where she had felt safe, before the fire took it all. The photograph was warped now, buckled from the water used to extinguish the flames. The colors had faded. 6 days. That was all the time she had before rent was due. 6 days with $83 in her pocket. 6 days to protect Micah and Rosa from Derek's threats, 6 days to navigate Sophie's vendetta, 6 days before everything collapsed again, before she failed them the way she had failed everyone else. Inside the apartment, behind the thin walls, she heard Micah cry out softly. A nightmare. She should go in. She should comfort him. But her legs would not move. She sat on the rusted metal of the fire escape with her feet dangling over the street 3 floors below, looking down at the wet pavement, at the way the streetlights reflected in the puddles like fallen stars, and she thought, maybe they would be safer without me. Maybe I am making it worse. Maybe the only thing I can do is step away. Her hands were shaking. The photograph trembled in her grip, threatening to slip through her fingers and fall into the darkness below. A breeze picked up, carrying the smell of rain and asphalt and the coming dawn. Then from inside, through the thin walls, Micah called her name. Vivien? His voice was small. Frightened. Bad dream. Vivien? She closed her eyes. Took a breath that felt like drowning on dry land. She climbed back through the window, back into the apartment where 2 children slept, back into the only life she had left to protect. One more day. She would survive one more day. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a blade, sharp and calculated and inevitable. Nicholas Corsetti had been surveilling Derek for 14 days through a network of security cameras, informants, and the kind of quiet intelligence that money and power made possible. On that 14th night, he called a family meeting at the restaurant. Every senior member of the Corsetti family arrived within the hour, men with scars and cold eyes and the kind of loyalty that could only be forged through blood and decades of shared secrets. Derek arrived at 9:22 p.m., confident in the way stupid men are confident, believing that the family dinner was routine. He saw his uncle at the booth, flanked by Rocco and Nino, and 8 other men whose names carried weight in the underworld. The candlelight cast shadows across Nicholas's face, and Derek felt the first tremor of unease. Sit, Nicholas said. Derek Saturday. Nicholas placed a tablet on the table. On the screen was a recording, audio and video, of Derek in a parking garage, threatening Vivien with specific details. His voice came through crystal clear, the threats against the children, the demands for money, the plan to use her as leverage. Derek watched his own face turn pale. These are your bank statements, Nicholas continued, sliding printed pages across the table. 53 unauthorized transfers over the past 8 months. $2.4 million. Our family's money. Money that belongs to me. Uncle, I was just... You do not speak. Nicholas's voice was flat, final. There are messages here between you and Sophie Langford. You plan to kidnap my son and hold him for ransom. You threatened a woman under my protection. Derek's hands were shaking. I didn't know he was your... Now you do. Nicholas leaned back in his chair. At 5 a.m. tomorrow morning, the federal government will arrest you. I have already delivered every piece of evidence to an FBI contact I have cultivated for exactly this kind of situation. You will be charged with racketeering, extortion, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and embezzlement. Your assets are being frozen as we speak. Your legal team will tell you that you are looking at 40 years in federal prison. The color drained entirely from Derek's face. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. You are no longer family, Nicholas said. You no longer exist to me. Rocco and Nino stood. 2 other men moved forward and escorted Derek out of the restaurant. The sound of his protests echoed briefly in the street outside, then stopped. Nicholas returned to his espresso as if nothing had happened, as if he had simply ordered another cup. The other men, watching him in stunned silence, understood that something fundamental had shifted. The boss was protecting his own in ways they had never seen before. He was building something other than an empire. He was building a family. Sophie Langford's destruction took slightly longer but proved infinitely more complete. The video arrived on page 6 at 3:44 a.m., a compilation of footage from Corsetti's restaurant showing Sophie's cruelty with surgical precision. Her racist comments to the hostess. Her dismissive remarks about Vivien's poverty. Her contempt for anyone she deemed beneath her. Within 6 hours, the video had been shared 847,000 times. By lunch, every major news outlet was running segments about wealthy philanthropist caught on camera being monumentally cruel. Her charity board held an emergency meeting at 2 p.m. and voted unanimously to accept her resignation. Her social circle began a coordinated abandonment that would have been comical if it had not been so complete. Text messages went unanswered. Gala invitations were rescinded. Lunch dates were cancelled. By evening, she had been disinvited from 14 society events. Her husband filed for divorce that same night. Sophie held a press conference the following day, standing on the courthouse steps with makeup running and photographers surrounding her like vultures. She attempted to apologize, to explain, to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. Protesters shouted her down. Within 3 days, she was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at country clubs, a name that made people uncomfortable at dinner parties, a woman who had become invisible in precisely the way she had tried to make others invisible. Nicholas watched the footage on his phone while sitting in his booth, and allowed himself one small smile. Justice, he understood, did not require blood. Sometimes it required only the truth and the internet and the precise leverage of a single phone call to a journalist who owed him a favor. The rain had started again outside, pattering against the restaurant's windows, and everything felt possible in a way it had not felt before. 3 days after Derek Collins collapsed into a federal holding cell, his silk tie surrendered to evidence lockers and his designer shoes catalogued under Exhibit B, Nicholas Corsetti sat alone in his booth at the restaurant, the one made of dark mahogany that had absorbed the confessions of 15 years. Rain hammered the windows. The black and white checkered floor reflected the candlelight like a broken mirror, and in that silence, he held his phone and watched the footage of Sophie Langford one more time, her face crumbling on the courthouse steps, photographers closing in like wolves, the careful architecture of her social standing collapsing in real time. Justice, he understood now, did not always require blood. He set the phone down and waited. When Vivien arrived at 7:15 p.m., the restaurant was empty except for Micah, who sat at the booth drawing with colored pencils Rocco had brought him an hour earlier. The boy's face lifted when she entered, and in that moment Nicholas saw what he had been missing for 3 years, not the absence of his son, but the presence of a woman who had loved that boy more fiercely than biology required. Her hair was damp from the November rain. Her jacket was the same worn green from the shelter. But something in the way she moved had changed. She was no longer bracing for impact. "Come," Nicholas said quietly. He gestured to the seat across from him. Vivien's steps slowed. Her eyes moved from Micah to Nicholas to the empty restaurant around them, and he watched the calculations happen behind her eyes: danger, safety, danger again, and then something else entirely. Saturday. Micah immediately climbed into her lap, pressing the colored pencil drawing into her hands. It showed 3 figures now instead of 2. A tall man. A woman with her hair color. A small boy between them, all of them connected by a line that could have been a rope or a river or simply the invisible thing that holds people together when the world tries to pull them apart. "I know you've been protecting my son," Nicholas began. His voice carried no accusation. "I know you didn't know who he was. I know you loved him anyway." Vivien's breath caught audibly in the quiet restaurant. A tremor moved through her shoulders. "His mother took him from me 3 years ago," he continued. "I've been searching ever since. Every private investigator, every resource, every name whispered in dark rooms. Nothing. And then one night I followed you home and I saw him on that fire escape, and he was teaching you to count between lightning and thunder, and I understood something that I should have understood years ago." He paused. "You saved my son's life when I couldn't. You kept him safe. You made him feel loved." Tears spilled down Vivien's cheeks without sound. Micah noticed and touched her face with the seriousness of a small scientist studying a phenomenon. "Why did you follow me?" she whispered. "Because I recognized something in you," Nicholas said. "A mother who was not his mother. A woman who had chosen him. In 15 years of building an empire, I have never seen anything as rare as that." He reached for an envelope on the table. It was cream-colored, expensive, the kind of envelope that contained decisions. "This is for you," he said. Inside she found a check for $50,000 and 2 keys attached to a small leather fob. The address on the lease agreement was in Park Slope, a 3-bedroom apartment with morning light and heat that did not depend on radiators that clanked like dying animals at 3 a.m. She pushed it back across the table. "I can't take this," she said. "I can't be someone's charity case." Nicholas did not retrieve the envelope. Instead, he watched her face with the patience of a man who understood the weight of pride. "It's not charity," he said finally. "You saved my son's life. This is a debt I can never repay. But if you need to hear a different word for it, we can call it payment. You saved him. I'm paying you." "It's too much," she breathed. "It is exactly enough," he replied. "And it will barely cover what I owe you." Micah tugged her arm. "Are we moving?" he asked with the stunning literalism of childhood. "Is she staying with us?" The question hung in the restaurant like incense. Rocco and Nino, watching from the kitchen doorway where they had been instructed to remain, exchanged a look that neither had seen on the other's face in years. Their boss was being negotiated with. He was accepting refusal. "That depends on what Vivien wants," Nicholas said, his eyes never leaving her face. She pulled the envelope back across the table slowly, took the apartment keys, and left the check. "I'll take the apartment for Micah and Rosa," she said. "But I keep working. I don't want to be someone's charity case. I want to build something myself." "Then work for me," Nicholas said. "Not at the restaurant. Help me raise him. He needs someone who loves him, not just protects him. Someone who chooses him every single day." "On one condition," Vivien answered. "You let me rebuild my life my way. Night shifts. Nursing school. My own money." He nodded once, a single gesture that carried the weight of consent from a man accustomed to giving orders. "I agree," he said. Over the next 4 months, the story that had begun in darkness began to find its shape in light. She moved into the apartment in Park Slope with Micah and Rosa, who had stopped flinching at loud noises and had started asking about favorite colors. Vivien enrolled in the practical nursing program at New York Technical College, studying at 2 a.m. while the city slept, her textbooks spread across the kitchen table under a lamp that never seemed to turn off. She worked 4 nights a week at the restaurant, not as a waitress but as the woman who knew Micah, who sat with him during homework, who braided his hair before school with the tenderness of someone who understood that small rituals matter. Nicholas visited 3 times per week. He brought groceries. He brought books. He brought the kind of patient presence that comes only when a man has learned the difference between control and protection. He would sit on the floor with Micah and build towers out of wooden blocks while Vivien studied in the next room, and neither of them spoke much, but the silence was warm instead of cold. One afternoon in October, he taught Micah to ride a bike in Prospect Park. Vivien watched from a bench as her son, she had begun to think of him this way, wobbled forward with his father steadying him, Nicholas's hand light on the seat, his voice calling out encouragement in Italian and English mixed together. She wore a sweater that Rocco had brought her, mentioning casually that it had belonged to someone his family knew, that she should accept it as a gift from the restaurant. By then she understood the architecture of loyalty and kindness well enough to accept. Every Sunday morning, groceries appeared outside her apartment door in carefully stacked bags. Organic produce. Specialty pasta. Coffee that cost more than a day's rent at the old place. She never ordered them. She always knew who sent them. When Vivien graduated from the nursing program in early November, she wore a black gown and walked across a stage at a CUNY auditorium in front of exactly 4 people, Nicholas, Micah, Rosa, and Nino, who held a handmade sign that Micah had decorated with markers. It said, "Congratulations Vivi," in letters that slanted in different directions, each one a small rebellion of joy. Nicholas held flowers. When she came down from the stage, he embraced her with the formality of a man still learning how to hold gentleness. She felt his heart beating against her ribs and understood that some walls take longer to dissolve than others. One evening in late November, Micah asked the question that would change everything. They were eating dinner together in the apartment, Vivien, Nicholas, Micah, and Rosa, who had become part of their small constellation through gravity and choice rather than blood. "Are you and Vivien going to get married?" Micah asked, his fork suspended over pasta with the confidence of childhood that assumes the world revolves around straightforward questions with straightforward answers. The fork paused halfway to Nicholas's mouth. A muscle moved in his jaw. His hand lowered to the table with deliberate control. Vivien changed the subject with the skill of someone who had learned to redirect attention. "Who wants dessert?" she said, perhaps too brightly. "I made chocolate." But later, after the children slept, she stood in the kitchen while Nicholas dried dishes, and neither of them spoke, and the silence had transformed into something that required an ending. By December, the city had turned crystalline with cold. Vivien was now a licensed practical nurse working at a children's hospital in Brooklyn, earning her own money, building something that belonged only to her. The apartment lease was still paid by Nicholas, but in 4 months she would take over the payments herself. She had calculated it all. She had a plan. Nicholas had rebuilt his relationship with Micah day by day, conversation by conversation. They had lunch together on Saturdays. They read books together on Sunday nights. Nicholas had learned to braid hair. It took him 6 YouTube videos and 1 patient explanation from Vivien, but he managed it now with clumsy competence. Micah had learned that his father had been searching for him. That he had never stopped. That love and distance could coexist in the same space for 3 years and still remain unbroken. On Christmas Eve, the restaurant closed for a private dinner. Vivien arrived at 7:36 p.m. in a simple green dress, not expensive, not designer, but chosen by her and paid for with her own paychecks from the hospital. It fit her perfectly because it was hers. She had never owned anything so entirely before. Nicholas stood when she entered. He wore the same black suit, but his face had changed. The hardness had not disappeared. A man like him carried steel in his bones, but it had been tempered by something softer. Something that looked like hope. Micah ran to her immediately and launched himself at her waist with the unself-conscious affection of a child who no longer feared abandonment. Rosa played in the corner with Nino's daughter, both girls coloring on oversized paper that Nino had brought specifically for them. Nicholas and Vivien sat at the booth. 6 months ago you were counting $17 in tips at a diner, he began, and I was a man who thought power was the only thing that mattered. You taught me I was wrong. She replied quietly, you gave me a chance when I had nothing. You didn't try to own me. That's rare. He reached across the table, stopping before her hand, asking permission with nothing but a slight movement of his eyes. She nodded. His fingers found hers. I've spent 6 months trying to be worthy of you, he said. Of him. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but I want to try. Every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me. She squeezed his hand. You already are. You let me stand as your equal. That's all I ever wanted. He kissed her hand first, then her lips, a gesture so gentle and certain that Micah cheered from across the room. Rocco and Nino applauded from the kitchen doorway where they had been stationed all along. Above the booth, on the wall, hung the drawing that Micah had made 3 years earlier, a man, a woman, and a child holding hands, all of them connected, all of them safe. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Nicholas had spent 15 years building walls. She had walked through them like they were made of smoke, carrying his son and asking nothing but the chance to be worthy of the family she had chosen. If this story moved you, drop a like right now and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe because tomorrow we bring you another story that proves love finds us when we're brave enough to be worthy of it. Tell us in the comments below, what would you have done in Vivien's position? We read every single one. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. We will see you in the next video. Goodbye.